Do you know those moments when life grabs you by the collar and forces you to stare straight into the mirror? It's not a conversation, it's a scream. It was on a gray afternoon between thunderclaps and slick pavement that everything changed. Pain came first, then the ground. Literally. But what hurt the most wasn't the impact of her hip hitting the floor, it was the silence that followed the phone call, the one where you expect comfort but receive indifference. Maybe tomorrow. That wasn't a reply. It was a verdict. This story isn't about tragedy. It's about rebirth. About the invisible limits we learn to see when pain becomes unbearable, both physical and emotional. It's about loneliness that screams louder than any siren. And it's about the radical choice to place yourself at the center of your own life, even after years of being a supporting character in your own story. You're about to witness a journey where storms aren't just weather, they're internal. Where empty excuses give way to firm decisions. Where the absence of family support turns into the chance to build a new network, one grounded in respect and true presence. And where dignity, long suffocated, finally finds space to breathe. This is the story of someone who heard the worst, fell, cried, but chose to rise. Not with the help of those she expected, but with strength that was born at rock bottom. 'Cause sometimes the only thing we need to change our lives is to fall. If this kind of story resonates with you in any way, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to come, and it might be exactly what you needed to hear today. It was supposed to be just another rainy afternoon. Kind where the sky scowls, raindrops hammer the roof like stones, and the wind seems determined to tear your soul away. She went down the stairs carefully, the way she always did, clinging to her knit cardigan and the exhaustion of someone who had lived alone for far too long. The gate was jammed, almost as if the universe itself was warning her, don't go. But she went anyway. Puddle in the garage, hidden among shadows and wet leaves, offered no mercy. Her foot slipped, her body turned to dead weight, and the impact on the ground was harsh, merciless. The sound of her hips snapping won't ever leave her mind. It was like with splitting in two. In that instant, the pain wasn't only physical. It was panic. It was the chilling realization that no one would come running. The sky collapsed outside, but the real collapse was inside her. She tried to move, and a scream escaped, raw and uncontrollable. The storm seemed to mock her fragility, as if whispering, "See? Alone, you're nothing." It was bitter to admit, but she was vulnerable in a way she had never imagined. The phone had fallen far from reach. And even if it had been close, who would she have called? Her son? He was too caught up in his own storms. The neighbors? Just polite waves across the gate, never real support. Loneliness materialized on that cold cement floor, between the smell of gasoline and the sound of rainwater rushing through gutters. Every minute was an eternity, and the fear was as sharp and undeniable as the fracture. She thought about her life. About the days that echoed with deafening emptiness. About meals eaten in silence, the couch that always sagged on the same side, birthdays ignored with last-minute flowers. Everything surfaced at once, as if the broken body was only a mirror of something that had been cracked long before her soul. It wasn't just her hip. It was her dignity leaking away with the rain. It was the haunting thought that, if she died there, maybe no one would notice until the smell betrayed her absence. Her heart pounded, but what cut deepest was the cruel truth: she wasn't missed. And that was worse than any fracture. Between lightning strikes, she realized the boundaries she had always pretended not to see were now screaming at her. Why was she always the one to fix things? To handle everything? To accept the bare minimum, hoping that someday the other would finally give more? What if this broken hip was, in fact, the only way the universe could say enough? That fall wasn't just a fall. It was the breaking point of everything she had swallowed for years. Every time she ignored a wound, every time she forgave out of fear of losing, every time she excused empty promises with "that's just how he is." The hard floor of the garage became the stage of a brutal awakening. The rain finally eased, as if it too had grown weary of watching her suffer. But there, stretched on the ground, she knew nothing would ever be the same. The sound of a car in the distance made her heart leap. Could it be someone? A city angel? Or just another hurried passerby in the theater of other people's lives? The reality was simple: she needed help, but she couldn't keep waiting for it to come from where she had always expected. The son who had once been her greatest hope was now nothing more than a name saved in her phone, followed by messages seen and ignored. The storm, contrary to appearances, wasn't the problem. It was the perfect backdrop to reveal all the cracks. She closed her eyes and tried to recall her last real hug. Kind that smelled like home, unhurried, without agenda. It had been so long that she doubted it had even happened. Life had rushed by too quickly, and somewhere along the way she had stopped placing herself first. Choices had become compromises. Love had turned into silence. And independence, once her pride, had become a burden. All of it was there on that floor, scattered beside a body now crying out for rescue. Yet alongside the cry, something else was being born. Something subtle, almost invisible. A whisper from within: maybe this pain has a purpose. Amid the agony, a light flickered boundaries. She had never known how to say enough with firmness. She always found a way to understand the incomprehensible, to accept the unacceptable, to swallow insults as if they were part of her emotional diet. But now, with her hips shattered and her pride in pieces, she knew something had to change. Pain had ripped the truth wide open: dignity has an expiration date. And when we push past the limit without realizing it, the body collects the debt, sometimes with interest. That fall wasn't the end, it was the beginning. A new conversation with herself. A new story, even if it didn't yet have a script. The minutes dragged on as she felt the chill creep through the half-open door. It was ironic. The door stood wide open, and yet she was trapped. Motionless, dependent on Lukier, the kindness of a stranger. And then, as if the universe had heard her thoughts, a car slowed down. Its headlights swept across the garage and lit up her body on the floor. Fate was finally showing a pulse. It was too soon to know what would come of it, but one truth was already certain: she would never be the same after that storm. Something inside her had broken too, and maybe that was exactly what she needed to begin rebuilding. The headlights were strong but not harsh. A simple car, the kind that blends into the rhythm of any neighborhood, pulled right into the driveway. The engine purred as the door flung open. A woman stepped out, her hair pulled back into a quick bun, a folded lab coat on the passenger seat, sharp eyes that saw everything. She ran straight toward the fallen woman without hesitation, as if this meeting had been scheduled by something greater. "I'm a nurse. My name is Stella. Can you hear me?" Her voice was firm, yet wrapped in a warmth almost maternal. There was no room for panic. She took Vera's hand with a gentleness that said more than words. Her eyes locked onto Vera's as if to promise, "You are no longer alone." Stella knelt beside her, ignoring the rain soaking her pants. With a steady touch, she checked the pulse, the breathing, the swelling at the hip. "Don't try to move, okay? You're going to be fine." Vera's breathing was shallow, but in that brief instant she felt something she hadn't in years: comfort. The storm still roared in the background, but it suddenly felt far away. Stella pulled out her phone and, with a few quick taps, dialed 911. While waiting for the dispatcher, she held Vera's hand as if she were holding an entire lifetime of silences. "What's your name?" she asked. "Vera," came the whisper. "All right, Vera, the ambulance is on its way. I'm here with you." And she stayed. Not because protocol demanded it, but because she chose to. Stella had just finished her shift at St. Mary's. She was exhausted, headed home, but she didn't think twice. Deep down she knew loneliness kills faster than any fracture. She fetched a blanket from her car and laid it gently over Vera. Then, from her bag, she pulled out a small umbrella to shield her from the drizzle that still fell. Simple gestures, yet heavy with dignity. And that changed everything. Through the pain, Vera felt an unfamiliar safety. Stella's questions were soft but steady. "Is there someone I should call?" Pause was long. Saying her son's name was like pressing on a bruise. "Roll. My son. His number's in the phone." Stella found the damp device still working and called. Once, twice. On the third try, he answered. The exchange was brief, almost cold. "Your mother has fallen. I called an ambulance. Shall be taken to the hospital." On the other end, silence. Then a flat okay followed by the click of disconnection. Stella exhaled slowly. She wasn't in the business of healing souls, but she knew abandonment when she heard it. The siren rose in the distance. To Vera, it sounded like church bells announcing that she still had a chance. Stella waved them down, directing the paramedics with precision. Probable hip fracture, conscious, vitals stable, severe pain. Crew was impressed by her clarity. "Are you family?" they asked. "No. I was just passing by." That just meant more than it seemed. Sometimes those who appear out of nowhere have a bigger impact than the ones absent for years. Team stabilized Vera with careful hands and firm instructions. Stella climbed into the ambulance, too. She never considered leaving her alone. On the ride, Vera's eyes stared at the sterile ceiling, but her mind drifted. Stella's touch lingered like a reminder that kindness still existed in the world. The silence between them was comfortable, almost conspiratorial. No promises, no speeches. Just presence. And in that moment, presence was everything. To be seen. To be cared for. To matter. Rare gifts for a woman who had grown used to surviving alone. For the first time in years, Vera didn't feel ashamed of her fragility. Instead, she began to sense that allowing help could also be its own kind of strength. When they arrived, Stella gave a full report to the ER staff, handled the paperwork, and only then did she say goodbye. "Vera, I'll come back to check on you. But right now, you're in good hands." With a gentle pat on her shoulder, she left. Vera watched the nurse vanish down the corridor, her chest full of gratitude and melancholy. Little did she know, this stranger who appeared in the storm would become one of the first bricks in the new support network she would later build. She couldn't see it yet. But one truth was already clear: there are people who choose to stay even when they don't have to. And that in itself was a rebirth. The hospital cold was a different kind of storm. Didn't come from the air conditioning, but from the waiting, the uncertainty, the absence of familiar faces. Vera was taken straight into triage and within minutes was lying on a narrow bed, surrounded by curtains and hurried voices. The fluorescent lights mocked her fragility, highlighting every wrinkle as though they were scars etched by life itself. The scans confirmed it without hesitation: hip fracture. The word echoed inside her ears like a sentence. Fracture. As if it symbolized not just the broken bone but the shattering of everything she thought she could still control. The doctor explained things carefully, but Vera barely heard. She was dizzy, and it wasn't from medication. The surgeon's name floated through the chatter of nurses and clipboards: Dr. Hannity. A man with a calm voice, tired eyes, and a shadow of stubble. He entered, pulled up a chair, and sat beside her. "Mrs. Vera will need to operate." His tone was gentle, but the words landed like heavy stones. He listed the risks: fragile bones, slow recovery. But what stuck wasn't the technical detail. It was fear. Raw fear. Fear of not waking up. Fear of waking up but never walking again. Fear of waking up to the same solitude that had nearly killed her more than the fall itself. The loneliness wasn't just emotional, Anna Maria, it had become logistical. Who would care for her afterward? Who would even notice if she needed help? She tried to breathe deeply, but the air caught in her chest. As the doctor spoke, her mind drifted. Paperwork left unfinished. An unwritten will. Conversations she never had with Raoul. Modest savings that could turn into disputes or simply be forgotten. Words she had swallowed, feelings she had buried. The surgery scared her, but an even deeper fear rose, dying without ever having lived the way she deserved. When the doctor asked, "Would you like some time to think?" the only answer she could muster was a slow nod. She knew there wasn't really a choice. It was surgery or letting the pain devour everything. From the next room came muffled sobs. Further down, a child coughed. The hospital was an opera of pain and hope, and Vera felt like an extra in the wrong play. Everything around her moved at full speed. Nurses prepared blood work, checked vitals, muttered medical jargon. But no one spoke of her, not the woman she was, not how she had landed in this storm of rain and life. The X-ray showed the fracture, but no image could reveal the deeper kind, the emotional break she had carried for years, now too heavy to ignore. Anesthetized not just by medication but by the absence of those who should have been at her side, Vera finally understood pretending it didn't exist was no longer an option. Temporary wards smelled of antiseptic and time standing still. Vera stared at the ceiling, replaying the surgeon's words, "The sooner we do this, the better." Time had turned into an enemy. She pictured two possible outcomes, one where everything went wrong, another where it all went right but she returned to the same hollow routine. That second possibility terrified her more than the first. 'Cause even if her body healed, returning to the same neglected life would be another kind of paralysis. Was it worth repairing the bone if her soul remained trapped? Her phone sat silent. No missed calls, no messages. Raoul knew. And still nothing. What could justify that kind of absence? Not work, not traffic, not any excuse. The sharpness of the fracture mixed with a deeper ache, neglect. She remembered Raoul as a boy, crying in the middle of the night after nightmares, and how she would run with a glass of water to soothe him. Now all it took was a phone call to reassure her, and he couldn't. In that sterile white room, the truth fell hard. Actions speak louder than any declaration of love. And silence? Silence is an answer too. She turned her face toward the window and caught her pale reflection in the glass. Was that really her? Where was the woman who once solved everything, who carried everyone else's burdens without flinching? The storm outside had passed, but the one inside her only grew. Fear of surgery now mingled with something new, anger. Not at life, not even at age, but at herself. For tolerating so much. For mistaking crumbs for care. For confusing proximity with love. Pain was sharp, born of wounded pride, but beneath it, a different voice rose. It's time to change. By the end of that night, Vera had signed the consent forms. The operation would take place within hours. She was afraid, yes. But for the first time, fear came paired with clarity. The storm had left scars, but also seeds. And even though she didn't yet know what would grow, she understood sometimes the body has to break for the soul to finally listen to what it has been screaming all along. The night dragged its feet, stretching every minute as if it wanted to eternalize her waiting. Vera lay in the pre-op bed, her eyes fixed on the ceiling like someone searching for answers in the emptiness above. She had already been medicated, already signed the forms, already done everything that was within her reach. Only one thing was missing. Him. Raoul. The son she had raised with so much sacrifice, the boy she had carried through fevers, the young man she had coached through his first job interviews. That same son who now knew his mother was about to undergo risky surgery and still hadn't shown up. Her phone sat by the bed on, charged, waiting just like her. Hours crawled by. Nurses came in, checking wristbands, adjusting IVs. A young intern tried to strike up conversation but gave up when she noticed Vera's distant stare. She wasn't really in that hospital room. She was traveling back in time, to Raul's 12th birthday when he cried because his father never showed. She remembered hugging him tightly and saying, "I'm here. I'll always be here." And she was. In everything. Too much, maybe. That was the problem when you make yourself the entire foundation. Others learn to climb without ever looking down. Raul had gotten used to her presence the way people get used to the refrigerator lightly noticed when it goes out. The first call came late. "Hi, Mom, are you okay?" Followed by that awkward silence that always says more than words. Vera's voice trembled despite her effort to control it. She told him about the surgery scheduled for the middle of the night, about her fear, about how she just wanted to hear his voice. Raul answered with prefabricated phrases, the kind you find printed on cheap greeting cards. "Everything will be fine, stay positive, we'll talk later." He spoke to her as though she were a colleague from work, not the woman who had given him everything. And there, in that mechanical dialogue, something inside Vera broke for good. Perhaps deeper than the hip itself. A fracture invisible but final. She hung up with damp eyes, though no tears fell. It was a dry sob, the kind that weighs on your shoulders and tastes bitter in your throat. And then, as if her soul had finally grown weary of excusing absence after absence, a new thought surfaced. Words aren't enough anymore. How many times had she clung to promises? To vows of change, to apologies dressed as affection, to texts that said, "Sorry, Mom, I've been so busy." That night, it no longer mattered if he sent flowers tomorrow, or if he called crying later. What mattered was this: in the most vulnerable moment of her life, he chose not to be there. In that hospital bed, between the steady beeps of monitors and the soft click of the door closing, Vera made a silent pact. From that moment on, she would give herself what she had spent a lifetime waiting for from others' presence. 'Cause Raul's absence was no longer surprising, was a pattern. And patterns only change when we change our response to them. It was time to stop accepting crumbs. To stop spinning neglect into the story of "he's trying." He wasn't. And that was fine. Painful, yes. But also liberating. There in that lonely room, her eyes fixed on the dark window, she began to build something new, a boundary. What struck her most was that even without his physical presence, Raul haunted the room that night. In every memory, every regret, every little gesture from the past. She saw how many times she had erased herself. How she canceled trips because what if Raul needs me? How she tucked money away just in case he has an emergency. How she swallowed his harsh words, blaming it all on stress. His absence wasn't simply a void, no, it was a mirror. And for the first time, she didn't look away. She faced it. And in that confrontation, she understood independence isn't selfishness. Self-respect. In the early hours before surgery, a nurse asked gently, "Do you want me to call someone once it's over?" Vera hesitated. Raul's name rose to her lips, but she stopped it there. "No. I'll let them know myself later." The nurse nodded with a faint smile. And that simple sentence, said almost automatically, was in fact an act of autonomy. Small but powerful. It marked the beginning of a new chapter. Of a woman who, even with a broken hip, was fully prepared to rebuild, this time for herself. And even if the outside world remained unchanged, she no longer was. Waking up after surgery felt like surfacing from a heavy dream. The ceiling was the same, the beeps and footsteps of the hospital unchanged, but something in Vera had shifted. It wasn't just the anesthesia wearing off, or the ache in her hip pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. It was a raw clarity, one she hadn't chosen, but one she could no longer ignore. When she opened her eyes, she realized she no longer had to wait for anyone. The silence of the room, once a torment, now felt fertile. For the first time in years, she was listening to her own voice without interruption. And that voice said, plain and steady enough. Not in anger. In decision. Recovery, they warned, would be long. Days in the hospital, weeks of physical therapy, months of rehab. But the real work would be internal. Vera began to revisit her life the way one renovates an old house piece by piece. Emotional dependence she had disguised as love. Excuses she had accepted in the name of peace. Compromises that had made her invisible in her own story. The hip fracture was becoming strangely a starting line. Point of no return. The physical pain had exposed an older wound, the wound of never choosing herself. Of always being last on her own list. And there, lying still, she began to practice something foreign but necessary, putting herself first. In the controlled solitude of recovery, Vera found herself circling thoughts she had once swept under the rug like dust. Why was I always the adult in the relationship? Why did I accept so much for so little? Why did I stay silent? The answers didn't come neatly wrapped, but it no longer mattered. Clarity doesn't demand explanations, it demands action. And she was ready. The decision unfolded like a silent blade. She would never again beg for presence. Never again disguise indifference as fatigue. Never again shrink her pain just to keep others comfortable. From that day on, if anyone wanted a place in her life, they would have to earn it. Period. It was almost strange that only now, with her body at its weakest, she could finally feel strong. Perhaps true strength isn't about enduring suffering, but about refusing to repeat it. Vera wasn't angry with Raoul, not in the old way. She was sad, yes. But it was a mature sadness, the kind that comes with lucidity. Kind that whispers love without respect is a cage. Care without presence is only a speech. Excuses recycled over years become nothing more than contempt disguised as concern. From now on, every boundary she set would be an act of self-love. Every no she spoke would mean, simply, I choose me. During one assisted bath, an aide asked casually, do you have children? Vera hesitated for a second, then replied, yes. The woman smiled, oh, they must be so worried about you. Vera smiled back but said nothing. Not bitterness, just acceptance. Raoul existed, of course. But her story could no longer revolve around his presence or his absence. Independence, once a youthful dream, was now a vital necessity. A clear emotional boundary. No one else would hold the power to unbalance her peace. It was time to rebuild her own structure from the ground up, not on promises but on practice. She began writing in a small notebook left by the hospital psychologist. Nothing elaborate. Just loose sentences, fragments, lists. On one page she wrote, what I allow, I teach. And she stared at that line for a long time. A lifetime of teaching people she could be ignored. That she would wait. That she always understood. And now, with all the cards laid bare, she realized she couldn't anymore. The inner boundary was clear: no longer tolerate what wounds. No longer stay silent when silence only served the other side. The dignity she sought wasn't out there, it was inside, in the courage to say, I won't accept this anymore. The notebook became her quiet companion. Every line she wrote was less about recording and more about reclaiming herself. She didn't need long speeches, only reminders. Little anchors for the days ahead. One morning, as pale light slipped through the blinds, she wrote, my silence kept others comfortable. My voice will keep me free. And with that, she finally felt the shift. Rehabilitation was slow, but each step with the walker was more than a physical victory, it was a declaration. Every strained movement whispered, I am still here. And with each step, she promised herself that she would no longer bend just to be accepted. The fracture had stitched something stronger inside her, something unbreakable. There were calls from Raoul, sporadic, shallow, guilt painted over with convenience. But they no longer pierced her the same way. She listened, responded politely, and then put the phone down without expectation. His absence had already taught her the greatest lesson: love isn't proved by excuses, but by presence. And presence, she now understood, began with her own. By the time she left the hospital, Vera no longer saw herself as the fragile woman who had fallen in the rain. She walked slower, yes, with the aid of a cane, but her eyes carried something new, a steadiness that only comes when you've faced both fracture and truth. The storm had taken away her old illusions, but it had handed her something greater: clarity. And as she crossed the hospital doors into the crisp morning air, Vera whispered to herself, almost like a vow this time, "I choose me." As the days went by, Vera's body began to show signs of healing. But what truly blossomed was her mind. She no longer saw the surgery as punishment. It was, in some strange way, a release. A radical call to change. It was as if life were saying, if you want change by choice, you'll change by necessity. And now she was changing. The old role of the unconditional mother was giving way to a whole woman. The ache in her hip reminded her that the body has limits. But it also served as a metaphor: the soul also gets tired of being pushed beyond what it can bear. And she had reached her limit. On the last night before discharge, Vera wrote one more line in her notebook: "We don't need to be surrounded to be complete." And for the first time she truly believed it. There was no longer bitterness poisoning her thoughts. There was steadiness. Quiet, irreversible decision. From that point on, her choices would be different. The doors would be open only to those who arrived with presence, with care, with truth. And love would only be welcome if it came with respect. What was to come, she didn't yet know. But what would never be again, that she knew with absolute certainty. It was visiting morning when he appeared. Raoul, with a wrinkled shirt, a slightly shaved face, and a bouquet of lilies in his hands. Expensive flowers from a fancy florist. Vera watched from the bed in silence. He walked in smiling, as if trying to soften the weight of his absence with a symbolic gesture. "Mom, look at me. I brought your favorites." She looked at the lilies like someone seeing a gift out of context: beautiful, yes, but disconnected from reality. That wasn't what she needed. Not now. Maybe never. And his smile, which once would have been a balm, now sounded performative. She knew gifts don't replace presence. Raoul sat in the chair beside the bed and started small talk like someone trying to ignore the elephant in the room. He asked about the surgery, the doctor, the food. Vera answered politely, but without sweetness. It was a lukewarm exchange, without that automatic maternal affection that fills the silence. He noticed. "You're different, Mom." She took a deep breath. "I am. And it's a good thing." Tone wasn't harsh, but it was firm. Raoul looked at her with a puzzled expression, like someone realizing for the first time that the usual script wasn't working. He pulled an envelope from his pocket and said, "We could talk about practical solutions." Vera took the envelope without hurry. It was a brochure for a long-term care facility for seniors, one of those pretty homes with gardens and weekly activities. "I've visited already. You'd have company, everything cared for with affection. It would be easier, safer." She held the paper calmly. Then she set it on the bedside table. And with a tone that mixed disappointment and clarity, she replied, "Raoul, stop." It wasn't a shout. It was a demarcation. A full stop. A verbal boundary that had never been set. Kind of boundary that separates care from convenience, help from elegant abandonment. He tried to justify himself. "It's just that I work so much, Mom. It's complicated, life's busy." And then came the phrases she knew by heart: "I worry about you, I want what's best, am only trying to help." Empty excuses. Disguises for someone wanting to ease his conscience without changing his behavior. Vera, eyes fixed on his, spoke with a sharpened calm: "You don't want what's best for me. You want what's most convenient for you." It hit like an invisible slap. Raoul was left without a response. He wasn't used to this version of his mother, the one who didn't soften her words to shield him from his own selfishness. Silence hung for seconds that felt like minutes. Raoul looked at the lilies, then at her. "Are you saying I don't care?" She smiled, but not with her lips, with her eyes. A smile of someone who finally understood. Caring is different from acting, Raoul. You may even feel it. But what you do shows something else. And that hurt. He tried to argue, but his mother didn't back down. For the first time, she held the boundary without guilt. There was no anger there. Only lucidity. Clarity of someone who had spent far too long being understanding about the unacceptable. Now she was the one dictating the rules of her own story. Raoul stood, straightened his shirt, and said, "So what do you want?" Vera drew a deep breath. "I want respect. I want real presence. And if you can't offer that, it's okay. But don't try to camouflage absence with expensive flowers or practical solutions." He remained standing, as if considering leaving. And she finished, "And if you're going to step away, let it be with truth. I'll survive. I've learned." Raoul, faced with a woman who seemed transformed, fell silent. For the first time, he understood he was no longer the center of the narrative. That he could no longer use affection as currency for control. She had woken up, and he didn't know how to handle it. Before leaving, he set the lilies on the table. "Keep the flowers." Vera looked at him tenderly and said, "You can take them. I don't want symbols anymore. I want actions." It was a short dialogue, but definitive. Raoul left with heavy steps. And for the first time, Vera felt no guilt for confronting him. She felt light. She felt integrity. The hospital no longer felt like a prison, but like a womb of transformation. There, she had done what she'd feared for years, said no. And more than that, said yes to herself. What would come afterward was still uncertain. But one certainty she already had: she would no longer accept being cared for with disdain. Ruth showed up on the second day after surgery, hair tied back in a colorful scarf and a clipboard in hand. A hospital physical therapist, she had the kind of energy that filled a room without trying. "Good morning, Vera. Ready to work up a sweat with me?" Question came with a wide smile, but no condescension. Vera answered with a skeptical look. "I haven't even gotten out of bed yet." Ruth didn't flinch. "That's exactly why we're starting. I didn't come here to keep you comfortable. I came to watch you walk." It was exactly the approach Vera needed. Someone who didn't pity her but believed in the strength still there, even if hidden beneath fractures and old hurts. First exercise was almost symbolic. Sitting on the edge of the bed. Sounds small, but for Vera it was like climbing a mountain. Pain in her hip was sharp, real, but Ruth remained at her side the whole time, guiding with precision and encouraging with short, firm phrases. "This isn't about strength, it's about persistence." With each movement, Vera felt it wasn't just her body relearning, her mind was too. With every small victory, like lifting her torso or planting her foot on the floor, a new layer of self-confidence formed. Ruth was not just a professional, she was a guide on the path back to autonomy. In the following days, the exercises increased. Gentle stretches, weight transfer, first steps with a walker. And with them came tears. Not from physical pain, but from pent-up emotion. Vera cried softly, without dramatics. Ruth noticed, but didn't interrupt. She gave space. She knew that sometimes the body needs to move to release what the soul is holding. One day, after a more intense session, Vera remarked, "I didn't know there was so much trapped in here." And she pointed to her chest. Ruth replied, "Without looking directly at her, physical pain is only the last signal. The body shouts what we refuse to say." The goal was clear: walk with the walker to the end of the hallway. then climb 3 steps, then shower with minimal help. Ruth structured everything in stages. But it wasn't just about movement, it was about regaining control. With each new milestone reached, Vera gained something more precious than strength: dignity. She was starting to see herself differently. No longer as the victim of a fall or abandonment, but as the protagonist of a turning point. The fracture had left its mark, yes, but it also opened space for something new, a kind of rebirth that only happens after you hit rock bottom. Conversations with Ruth went beyond exercises. They talked about family, aging, shelved dreams. Vera confessed her fear of going home and finding everything the same. Ruth listened attentively and said, "You don't have to go back to what was. You can go back to something new. Place is the same, but the person walking into it will be someone else." That stayed with Vera. Was it possible to create new routines, new rules, new boundaries? And what if it was? What if going home was actually the new beginning she had never dared to build? Her body still trembled, but her mind was already walking. During one session, Ruth brought a handheld mirror. "I want you to see how you're getting stronger." Vera looked at herself, doubtful. Messy hair, dark circles, surgical marks. "I don't see strength here." Ruth laughed. "The strength is in your eyes. You just need to relearn how to see it." It was a simple scene, but powerful. Vera stared at her reflection for long seconds. She didn't see the frail old lady she imagined. She saw a woman under reconstruction. Not perfect, not resolved, but decided. And that, in itself, was an everyday miracle. She was beginning to believe that, yes, it was possible to start over with dignity. At the end of each session, Ruth recorded the progress and left a small assignment. "Tomorrow, I want you standing within 2 minutes. Today, try brushing your own hair. Remember to drink water, it's part of the process." Each small gesture was part of a bigger plan to give back to Vera the autonomy stolen by the fall and by life. The most impressive thing was that Vera not only met the mark, she exceeded it. It was as if, with every step, she was silently telling the world, "I'm still here." And that simple realization day after day became fuel. In the last session before discharge, Ruth held Vera's hands and said, "You did the hardest work of all. You believed you deserved to walk again." Vera didn't answer right away. She was moved. She knew it wasn't just about walking. It was about existing with presence, with purpose, with clear boundaries. Ruth didn't know it, but she had been more than a physical therapist. She had been a bridge. And now, on the other side, Vera was ready to cross on her own. With fear, maybe. With pain, yes. But with the certainty that, for the first time in a long while, the one guiding her steps was her. Stella returned as promised. Even though she wasn't scheduled on that shift, she made a point of stopping by the hospital before her next one. Vera was sitting up, leaning on the walker, hair tied up any which way, her expression lighter than days before. "Just look at you. You've even got the posture of a department head," Stella teased, walking in with that same smile that days earlier had warmed a moment of pure despair. Vera smiled, but this time the corner of her mouth rose for real. "You came back." Stella approached and answered simply, "I said I would. And I keep my word." That sentence landed like a sweet blow, a striking contrast to everything Vera was used to hearing. They talked for a few minutes. They covered the recovery, the progress, the expectation of going home. Stella listened attentively, like someone who sees beyond the words. At a certain point, Vera looked away and said, "Did you know he brought flowers? And a brochure for a nursing home?" The tone was more of a statement than of hurt. Stella nodded with a contained gesture. "And you? What did you say?" Vera took a deep breath. "I said I don't want symbols. I want actions." Stella folded her arms and replied firmly, "Perfect. 'Cause you deserve better." 3 words. A gigantic impact. As if someone had finally named a truth that had been stuck in her throat for decades. Vera tried to change the subject, but Stella wouldn't let her. You've spent your whole life trying to be understanding, justifying absence with empathy, holding up bonds that only worked if you were erasing yourself. And that, Vera, isn't love. Survival. Silence filled the room. Vera wasn't used to hearing this kind of validation. Usually she was the one who cared, who listened, who minimized. Now, hearing from another woman that she deserved more was a jolt. It wasn't a scolding. It was a mirror. And for the first time she saw herself whole. Wounded, yes, but whole. Stella continued, you think having boundaries pushes people away. But what really pushes them away is the absence of dignity. Those who truly care respect your boundaries. Those who just want to benefit leave when you start taking a stand. Vera remained quiet. Cut deep. 'Cause for so long she had believed that love meant yielding. That being a mother meant accepting everything. That old age was synonymous with a deserved loneliness. And Stella, with simple words, dismantled all of it. Vera looked at the nurse and said, I don't know if I know how to live differently. Stella replied, you'll learn. One step at a time. Like in physical therapy. Conversation carried on, now lighter. Stella spoke about other patients, similar stories, repeated patterns. And in all of them there was a constant: women who were taught to serve, to accept, to not complain. Vera saw herself there. In every detail. In every concession. And she began to understand that her story wasn't an individual mistake, but a collective portrait. We learn that we have to earn attention, earn respect, earn care. But no one teaches us that we're born deserving. So we spend our lives trying to prove our worth. Stella said it so naturally it seemed obvious. And maybe it was. But no one had ever said it to her before. Before leaving, Stella picked up Vera's little notebook, the same one where she wrote stray lines and reflections. On the last page, she wrote in a firm hand, you deserve better. And you have every right to demand it. Then she closed the notebook and set it back on the bedside table. If you ever forget, it's here to remind you. Vera looked at that sentence like someone reading a sacred truth. It wasn't just praise. It was a permanent reminder. That deserving isn't arrogance, it's the minimum. And demanding respect isn't hardness, it's self-care. Stella left, but she left behind the kind of presence that remains even when the body goes. Vera stayed there, alone again. But different. It wasn't solitude, Anna Maria, it was fertile silence. An inner space where, little by little, she began to rebuild her own story on something new: self-worth. The pain in her hip was still there. The future challenges, too. But now she had an anchor. An emotional point of departure. And every time she felt like retreating, accepting less, staying quiet in the face of disrespect, she would have those words written on paper and etched in her soul. That night before sleep, Vera read and reread the sentence. Then she picked up her phone and opened a new note. She wrote just 2 words, I choose me. And without realizing it, she smiled. 'Cause now the storm had passed. Her body was still recovering, yes, but her soul had started to dance. Returning home felt like stepping into a territory that had once been familiar but now needed a new map. Vera no longer wanted to survive in that space, she wanted to rebuild it on her own terms. Evelyn, a caregiver recommended by Ruth, arrived the following week, young, direct, and no-nonsense. I'm here to help you live your way, not to dictate your routine. And that was music to Vera's ears. Together, they reorganized the house: grab bars in the bathroom, a comfortable chair on the porch, medications within easy reach. It wasn't luxury, it was structure. Each adjustment was a reminder that real care begins on the inside. Using the life insurance Shed saved for years and which, for a long time, Shed thought to leave untouched for Raul, Vera paid for the changes. It was the first time she'd invested in herself without guilt. She arranged scheduled ride services, rebuilt her list of trusted contacts, created a reading calendar, and even revived her old love for watercolor. Sitting at the table, brush in hand, she understood being alive isn't just breathing. It's occupying space with intention. And that now was her new life project. Her relationship with Raoul also went on the restructuring list. Vera decided she wouldn't call, wouldn't chase, wouldn't explain what was obvious. Care cannot be begged for. If he wanted to maintain a bond, he would have to adapt to the new rules. This wasn't distancy, it was a filter. And for the first time, she felt peace when turning off her phone at night. Not out of spite, but for rest. The world, which once seemed to spin around "what if he needs me?" now revolved around "how do I want to live?" One ordinary afternoon, while tidying the bookshelf, Vera wrote on a sticky note, "The house is mine. So is the life." She stuck it on the fridge. Evelyn saw it and smiled. That's it. And it was. This new phase didn't have a festive reception, but every detail: the coffee brewed just right, the comfortable silence, the absence of emotional blackmail showed that she was finally living with independence. And more with choice. Raoul called on a Tuesday afternoon. Vera answered calmly. "Hi, Mom. I wanted to see you." And without hesitation, she replied, "All right." Friday at 3 p.m. Until 5 p.m. He went quiet for 2 seconds, probably waiting for the usual invitation to drop by whenever. But that no longer existed. On Friday, he arrived with flowers and a rehearsed smile. Vera thanked him, set the flowers aside, and got straight to the point. "Let's talk about what really matters." And there, without tension, she presented the new reality: clear boundaries, defined routine, respected autonomy. Raoul listened like someone who no longer recognized that woman. And it was true. She was someone else. Vera explained that she would no longer accept intermittent presence or emotional excuses on convenient days. "I don't want love on a schedule. I want respect with continuity." Raoul tried to justify himself, but she gently cut in, "You don't have to promise anything. Just understand that here now there are rules. And if you want to be part of it, great. If not, it'll still be fine." For the first time, the conversation didn't end in tears, nor in false hope. It ended in clarity. Raoul nodded and said his goodbyes, respecting the time. Vera closed the door and felt ownership of herself. The next day, she saw the flowers on the table. Pretty but strange. As if they were saying, "I'm sorry, I don't know how to love you without buying something." She picked up the arrangement, walked to the kitchen, and put it in the trash. Not out of anger, but out of self-honor. It was more than discarding flowers, it was refusing crumbs dressed up as care. If Raoul wanted a fresh start, he would have to learn a new language, the language of committed presence. From then on, Vera knew he would come and go, but she would no longer be at the mercy of it. He was welcome only if he entered without unresolved emotional baggage. The new rule was simple: either we walk together or we walk apart. But no one would drag her along the middle of the road anymore. On the following Friday, Vera's home felt different. Table set, soft lighting, gentle instrumental music. Nothing fancy, but everything done with presence. Clara, the neighbor who for years had exchanged only quick greetings at the gate, was now seated at the table. Della, true to her word, arrived with a light wine and funny stories from the hospital. Between simple dishes and genuine laughter, Vera experienced something rare: belonging. Not because of family obligation, but because of affinity built. That dinner, though informal, symbolized something much bigger. She was no longer alone. And above all, she no longer depended on the presence of those who never showed up. Conversation flowed easily. Childhood stories, botched recipes, light confessions. Clara shared that she, too, had a distant son. Della spoke of patients who, like Vera, discovered their own worth through pain. And in the midst of an improvised dessert, Vera said something that brought the table to silence. I thought I'd lost everything, but now I see I was empty because I kept accepting the bare minimum. They both looked at her with affection. Now you're full, Stella replied. And she truly was. Full of life, of plans, of newly forged bonds, and of a lightness that didn't come from others but from herself. Her phone buzzed. It was Raoul. I saw Clara's car out front. Everything okay? Vera read it, locked the screen, and carried on with the conversation. Not out of pride, but because she no longer felt the need to explain being well without him. His presence, when it came, was a bonus, not an expectation. And that changed everything. The network she was now building was firm, voluntary, made of listening and choice. And most of all, free of unrealistic expectations. The end of the night, Clara helped wash the dishes and Stella put the plates back on the shelf. Vera sat on the couch with a cup of tea and smiled. There, without grand declarations, she was living what Shed always sought: care with reciprocity. It wasn't a crowd, but it was true affection. And that, to her, was worth more than any blood tie. The following week, Vera scheduled a meeting with the lawyer. She arrived prepared, documents in hand, a notebook, and a rehearsed speech. She wanted to reorganize everything: inheritance, medical directives, end-of-life decisions. Not out of mistrust, out of clarity. For the first time, she was doing this not as a mother, but as a woman who respects herself. She told the lawyer, I want everything in writing. I'm not going to spend my remaining years waiting for someone to authorize my freedom. And he simply replied, it's admirable. Few do this before it's too late. She smiled. For the first time, her autonomy had official paperwork. On the way home, she called Raoul and invited him to talk. He came. Vera showed the documents, explained her decisions. She was firm but not harsh. Raoul seemed stunned. He wanted to understand, maybe to control. But she closed the conversation with serenity. It's my life. Whoever wants to be part of it adapts. Whoever doesn't continues on. Raoul didn't yell, didn't cry. He just listened. And she knew listening was a step. But not enough. Now, Vera wasn't waiting for steps, she was walking on her own. On Sunday, she made a simple coffee, played her favorite music, and wrote in her notebook, I'd rather be alone than kept out of habit. And she felt at peace. It wasn't bitterness. It was acceptance. She knew hard days would still come, and longing, and even backslides. But now she had tools. She had a network. She had herself as the priority. The storm had taken much, but it had cleared the sky as well. In the late afternoon, Vera walked out to the porch, sat down, and watched the horizon. It wasn't the same as before. It was clearer, more open. And she, though marked by the fall, was whole. With a future that held no promises from others but was full of promises she had made to herself. How many times do we only learn to choose ourselves when everything collapses? Vera fell. Literally. But what truly broke wasn't her hip, it was the illusion that love without presence is enough, that care without respect suffices, that living to please is the same as being loved. And in that painful process, she discovered something many people spend a lifetime ignoring: dignity begins the moment you stop begging and start choosing. She didn't become a heroine. She didn't give speeches. She didn't need a crowd. It was enough to say no where she used to yield. Enough to close the door to those who only knew how to show up when they needed something. Enough to look in the mirror and, for the first time, say, I deserve more. And that more didn't come from the outside. Came from within. From every boundary upheld, every conscious step, every choice made without guilt. If you made it this far, subscribe to the channel and share. There's much more to come.